Hello and happy Wednesday. This is a very special video today because today it is no longer 2025. Rather, it is 1982, August of 1982. And you're here with me, and I'm your guide. And I'm about to show you one of my favorite things from the 80s. This is Starlog magazine. The celebration of all that was cool in the 80s. Science fiction, horror, and pop culture. And this was an important issue because we were getting close to some really, really exciting movies. I loved this magazine so much. This was one that me and my brother would always get, and we'd share a copy. My brother always read it first, and then I would read it, and then we'd talk about it. And we would talk about all of the upcoming movies, like Revenge of the Jedi, sneak preview. And that's right, when originally the title was going to be Revenge of the Jedi, not Return of the Jedi. But then George Lucas decided that that title was a little bit too negative, that revenge was not a Jedi virtue. So he changed it to Return. But interestingly, and my dad can attest to this, they actually did produce action figures with Revenge of the Jedi cards, and then they recalled them. My dad actually got to see some of them. Oh, those things would be worth a mint right now. Also, we're going to talk about Blade Runner and Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan. Megaforce, which was, I guess it's a cult classic now. The Road Warrior, The Thing, and Sandahl Bergman from Conan the Barbarian. On the back, we see this old 1982 ad for baseball caps with USS Enterprise. We have a cat with Blade Runner on it, the Tyrell Corporation from Blade Runner, and the United Federation of Planets. So back then, if you wanted a hat like this, you had to order it and, turn in this order form. It's a thinking cap company. So this was always a lot of fun. The crew of the Enterprise invites you to a science fiction extravaganza unlike anything you've ever seen before. Ultimate Fantasy. A live entertainment spectacular of the future today, featuring a unique light show set to a magnificent musical score. So here's the table of contents page. August 1982, number 61, the magazine of the future. And we've got all kinds of interesting articles in this issue. The making of Star Trek II, Walter Koenig, Star Trek's Chekhov, The Road Warrior, the sequel to Mad Max, Sandahl Bergman, Conan's Valeria, Sean Young from Blade Runner, Megaforce, the new movie and the toy line that was coming out with it, Epcot, a new Disney feature in Walt Disney World, a Jedi Desert Report, Luke, Leia, Lando, in Arizona. The Thing, an interview with producer Stuart Cohen, from the bridge, letters, log entries, and then basically there was a whole package of interesting things to read. And we have some articles. The latest on Creepshow and The Thing. Fangoria was kind of like a sister magazine. I think it still exists. But I think Starlog is gone. I haven't seen it in a long time. Some letters talking about topics like Battlestar Galactica. Would it ever come back? It was popular, but it wasn't popular enough to justify the cost. Robert Heinlein. Get it, enjoy it, and trumpet the news. Heinlein's back and better than ever. I think he wrote Starship Troopers. Really good author. Atomic Cafe, Living with Annihilation. And now let's do a little segue into what it was like living in the 80s for those of you who didn't live through the 80s and are interested in it. We were in the end of the Cold War, and the idea of nuclear war was a daily thing we all thought about. We all the stress of nuclear war was drilled into us, and it definitely influenced our movies, our TV shows, our books, even our whole life. So we were really glad when the Cold War ended. Not in any rush to get back into a new one. There's Sally Ride, the first female astronaut. The Mad Magazine Star Trek satire. Stephen Collins as Jake, and the show was originally called Brass Monkey, but they changed the name to Tales of the Gold Monkey. It was kind of an Indiana Jones ripoff. As a matter of fact, after Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, there were tons of these Indiana Jones ripoffs on everything. Every TV show did an Indiana Jones inspired episode, like Voyagers and Heart to Heart, and you name it. They all did an Indy episode. But of course, Stephen Collins has had some awful scandals, so I don't even like to even think about him being in movies that I liked. The original soundtrack recording from the Paramount Pictures Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and it really was a great soundtrack by James Horner. It was much different than the first Star Trek, and just really stirring, and most people, I believe, feel that Star Trek II was the best Star Trek movie. I would say between 2 and 4. I loved those two, and then 3, then 6, then 1, and then 5 is probably how I rate them. Then we're talking about Blade Runner here. If you watch Blade Runner now, I still think that the special effects hold up really well. I have all 4 versions, or maybe it's 6 versions. I have one of those disc sets that has all of the versions of Blade Runner. So I've watched them, and I do think I like the final cut best without the voiceover. I really do. But there's lots of different ways you can watch Blade Runner. But I'll tell you a little anecdote from the 80s. When we used to go rent movies in the early 80s, you didn't really have video stores. You had a section in a grocery store that rented VHSs and VHS players. So, or Betamaxes. And before Hastings and other things came out. So anyway, we would go to the grocery store, like Skaggs Alpha Beta or whatever, to rent movies. And we'd rent a VCR. And Blade Runner was there, and I always wanted to watch it, but the box warned viewers that it had terrifying graphic violence in it. And as a child, I was scared to watch the movie because the box said that the graphic violence in Blade Runner was just over the top. And of course, I've watched it, and I think it's pretty tame compared to stuff you can watch. I mean, your average episode of Grimm is more graphic. Anyway, here is the making of Star Trek II. And a really interesting article, a great movie. Kirk and Spock still relatively young. Of course, this was the movie where Spock passed away, and it was extremely, at the time, when Spock died in the movie, it really did affect a lot of people. People were really depressed about that. And they ended up having to bring him back because I think people were losing their minds. But Spock did come back to life. There's Khan, Ricardo Montalban. And I always wondered why, if you watch the original episode Space Seed in 1966 with Ricardo Montalban when he first played Khan, he was young and so was everyone in his crew. But then when we get to SETI Alpha 6, or and find Khan again. He's aged, but his whole crew is still young. So did they get some better stuff than he did in the genetic field or something? I don't know. Because this is a really young lady, and all of them. There was no other old people. Another little interesting thing that most people don't know, they cut the scenes out, but in the original version of Wrath of Khan, there was a baby included in Khan's group because it was his son. And the baby was in several scenes in the very end of the movie when Khan is detonating the Genesis device and it's on the transporter pad and it's about to explode. One of the last things you see is the baby crawling up to it and smiling when the lights are shining in its face, which was just such a depressing, awful scene that they had to cut the whole baby subplot out. Of course, the William Shatner with the late Merritt Butrick, who played his son David. Here's more about the Ultimate Fantasy Star Trek show, and you would get a chance to meet James Doohan, George Takei, Harv Bennett, Walter Koenig, and Mark Leonard, who played Sarek, and songs sung by Nichelle Nichols. Tentatively scheduled are Shatner, DeForest Kelley, and Kirstie Alley, who played Saavik. We got some behind-the-scenes shots of Chekhov smiling in his spacesuit. He's kind of grinning when they're lifting him up in the scene where Khan lifts him up. United Fan Productions presents, and it shows props and masks and effects. Here we have soundtracks, and these were on vinyl records. In 1982, we still had vinyl, and we had an 8-track player. We didn't have a cassette tape player yet. We got one later. So our choices were vinyl records and 8-tracks. And here's the soundtrack to Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, Touch of Evil, Alfred Hitchcock movie, Dressed to Kill, it's Brian De Palma, I think, directed that. Battle Beyond the Stars, which was kind of a Roger Corman Star Wars ripoff. Time After Time, which had David Warner playing Jack the Ripper, who travels through time. Really interesting movie. Mad Max. Escape from New York, obviously a classic now. Forbidden Planet. You might have seen that on my cup that I drink coffee out of a lot. North by Northwest. Here's an article about the Road Warrior, a brand new movie coming out. Mel Gibson reprising his role as Max from the original Mad Max. It was, I still think I liked Mad Max better. And it's weird, too, because in the first Mad Max, you didn't really get the sense that there was a nuclear holocaust. You just got the sense that there was some kind of economic breakdown. In the second Mad Max, it was much more established that there was some kind of holocaust. And in the third Mad Max, it was just absolutely established that. But I don't, it doesn't really kind of add up when you watch the first Mad Max movie versus the third. The world is completely different. Because there still seems to be an infrastructure in the first Mad Max movie. And we see some of the effects. Another interesting thing about the Road Warrior is it introduced the pilot that would turn up again in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, but he seemed to be Bruce Spence's character. He seemed to be a completely different character in Thunderdome, even though he was a pilot and generally speaking was almost the exact same character in every other way. One of the great science fiction artists, Chesley Bonestell, drawing all kinds of science fiction landscapes. Now we get to Sandahl Bergman, Conan's partner and lover, a heroic star on the rise. And let me tell you, as we all have, we survived from 2015 until recently. And the whole Hollywood around 2015 forgot how to make characters for women, particularly tough female characters. They had Sandahl Bergman in 1982 playing one of the toughest female characters who you believed probably could take on the average guy. She was a bodybuilder, she's tall, strong, but she was still a normal human being. She wasn't this stoic kind of personality minus thing that they decided they needed to make all female characters into in the last few years, completely making boring movies. This is how you do it. Watch Conan the Barbarian, watch Sandahl Bergman if you want to see a real badass woman. Not whatever. She wasn't Natalie Portman pretending to be Thor. She really was the real deal. And you could say the same thing about Sean Young. Sean Young is kind of scary in real life anyway, if you read about her. I think she probably could beat up the average guy. But this was Blade Runner. My God, I'm Not Human. An interview with an emotional android. I really didn't like the Blade Runner 2049 nonsense. I didn't care for that one bit. I didn't like the idea of Deckard being established as a mech. I liked it better when you weren't sure. The viewer could make their own choice on that one. And the clues in the movie that he was really a mech were very reaching. I mean, an origami unicorn, and one scene where it kind of looks like his eyes lit up. Other than that, I thought the Blade Runner sequel was hard to get through. It was so boring. Where Nomad Has Gone Before, that was a goofy parody title of Star Trek the Motion Picture, because Nomad was, and basically they made an episode of Star Trek that had almost the exact same plot about instead of being called Voyager, it was called Nomad, and it was a droid, a robot that went out into space and then returned home trying to find God, or it's a creator. And then basically they made fun of the fact that Star Trek the Motion Picture was just kind of rehashing that whole plot again. I thought the idea of Voyager coming back was an interesting idea. Megaforce, a blueprint for films, toys, and weaponry. Now, this was an interesting movie directed by the guy who directed Smokey and the Bandit, Hal Needham, and it was about a super duper science fiction high tech force of super soldiers who took care of problems around the world. It had Barry Bostwick, soon to be an action figure from Mattel. I bet those. I never got any Megaforce action figures, but I did see the movie and liked it. It had the guy from Xanadu playing like his sidekick, and then it had Persis Kambata from Star Trek the Motion Picture, who played Alia, but she had hair in this movie. Other than that, the movie was so cheesy. Flying motorcycles and lasers, and it was entertaining, I thought. Building the greatest dream. Disney's Epcot Center brings the hope of the future into the reality of today. I went to Epcot for the first time in 1984, and I was pretty blown away, thinking it really did feel like you were, seeing the future, for sure. It was a really neat idea, and I have not been back since, and I don't know how much things have changed. Some of the predictions they had in 1984 were right, and some of them were wrong. But this ball, I think the ride inside of the big ball was called Spaceship Earth, and I remember that. I enjoyed it thoroughly. My parents really liked it too. I think the part they really liked is there was kind of like all the different countries of the world you could walk around, and they had restaurants, and they recreated some famous buildings and stuff. It was pretty cool. Annie was a real popular movie in the early 80s. And then HBO. When we ended up getting HBO, they, for a Christmas present, they actually played that movie on Christmas as a surprise, and it just blew people's minds because it had just left the theaters, and usually you had to wait a long time before a movie made it to HBO. And some more science fiction art here. This is Tatooine. This is what they were calling Blue Harvest when they were filming Return of the Jedi. You can see some of the cast. There's Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, Billy D. Williams. They're getting ready for scenes on this, and they're revealing some of the things coming up in the movie. I think the movie came out in '83. Took a long time to shoot it. Originally George Lucas wanted David Lynch to direct it. Can you imagine how that would have been? I don't know. I mean, he ended up directing Dune, and I don't know. I feel like Dune came out after Return of the Jedi. Something David Lynch, or something that George Lucas saw David Lynch had done that made him change his mind really quick, because I love David Lynch. I'm not gonna lie. Mary loves David Lynch. We have watched all the Twin Peaks and the David Lynch movies and discussed it. And we even watched there's something called, you can watch this on the Internet Archive. It's called Fire Walk With Me, the Blue Rose Cut. You just Google it. It's basically the Twin Peaks movie Fire Walk With Me, but with all of the deleted scenes added back in. And it's much longer. It took us 2 nights to watch it. But it has much more material. I'm not going to say it makes any more sense, but it was interesting. If you are a Twin Peaks fan, I would recommend looking that up. So here's some other issues of Starlog that had come out. And you can see what the covers looked like. You had Star Wars. You had, some of these things I don't even recognize. There's Battlestar Galactica. That, of course, Blade Runner, Star Trek, Empire, Superman, Alien. And then you could order back issues from this page right here, basically. This was your chance to complete your collection. Some of them were not available, like the issue number 1, where it covered Star Trek. Issue number 9 had interviews with William Shatner. So, but all the other ones you could get. Stuart Cohen, the producer of The Thing, on scaring people the right way. The Thing is a scary movie, and it's also a really disturbing movie. I don't really like to watch it. I'm not going to say it's a bad movie. It's not bad at all. I don't like a lot of the scenes with the dogs, because I like dogs. But I still thought the movie was effectively scary, and it still holds up today. The effects were absolutely nightmarish. But I love Kurt Russell. I think it kind of reminds me a little bit of Bone Tomahawk, where he's older, but it's sort of another one of those hopeless situations, fighting a sublime enemy. Just really, really interesting how Kurt Russell will make a lot of movies like Tombstone and Overboard and stuff, but then he'll make these dark movies too, like the Hateful Eight, or anything he does with Quentin Tarantino. Leonard Nimoy record albums. This is when Leonard Nimoy was doing his singing career. He did theme from Star Trek, Once I Smiled, The Ballad of Bilbo Baggins, Spock Thoughts. So you could get your Leonard Nimoy music album. The Illustrated Harlan Ellison. He directed one of my favorite Star Trek episodes. He didn't direct it. He wrote one of my favorite Star Trek episodes called The City on the Edge of Forever. and he didn't like the way they ended up making it. So eventually, they used his script to make a comic book that you can get, and I got the whole comic book, and it's really one of my favorite comics ever because it's the whole shooting script from the Harlan Ellison version, and it was much different. Although, would I say better? Maybe not, because I really loved that episode. I had to get some coffee. Battlestar Galactica Iron-On transfer book. My brother had a Battlestar Galactica Iron-On a t-shirt. My mom ironed it on for him, and it was like it was glittery looking, and it was the spaceship. And then my mom got me an Iron-On. It was a Dukes of Hazzard one, and I wore that shirt until that thing peeled off. He Will Never Die. The original Spock memorial shirt, high quality black transfer on 100% Hanes light blue cotton shirt, $9.95. So it was a shirt with Spock on that says "He will never die." People really did not like the idea of Spock dying. And this is just a way to buy things that you might be interested in. Here's a way to make your own kind of Reliant with existing Star Trek models, because they didn't make a Reliant yet. So they gave you instructions to make a Reliant-like ship from your Star Trek model kits, until eventually they did make a Reliant. But it took a long time for them to get around and doing that. And then here's the continuation of some of the articles. And then we get to next month, that are going to be talking about Tron, which was, they also made a sequel to it that wasn't so good. It wasn't really bad. It just didn't need to be made. The original Tron, for when it came out, was so cutting edge and so amazing. And when the sequel came out, I guess the cutting edge part was maybe the de-aging of some of the actors from the original one, but it didn't hold up very well. If you watch the Tron sequel now, your average deep fake or average app can make better, effects than what they had there. So that's one of the problems with some of these de-aged scenes in movies. There's the last word from Howard Zimmerman, the editor. And then we get to some photo guidebooks put out by Starlog, spaceships, which my brother had this. He had the Heroes one. So I had those two to look at. Villains we had. I think that's it. I really would have wanted the science fiction toys and bottles, but I never got it. But either way, this was a fun magazine for 1982, and it had some color photos in it, and for the age I was at and the age my brother was at, this was just the greatest magazine in the world for us. It covered all the things we loved to watch and loved to talk about. So it's just kind of cool to look at this again. And as time went on, the magazine got better. It got more in color. This is an early one, so you still have a lot of black and white pages, but as time went on, I believe the whole magazine was in color, instead of just some color pages. And I don't know if the magazine still exists, or if it folded like so many magazines have. I don't know. I haven't seen it in a long time, though. If they tried to bring some magazines back, like Cracked and a few others from the 80s, but it didn't last. And then Mad Magazine's gone out of business, which is hard to believe because it existed for so long. And now it's gone. So things have changed. But I guess we're back to 2025 now. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you like my channel, so please consider subscribing. Click the bell icon, and leave a comment and a thumbs up. I'm going to get around to answering comments. I'm slow on that. I apologize. I've read all of your comments, and I appreciate them all. So, anyway, I'm going to get on answering them, and I will see you again probably on Sunday. So, bye now.